Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now today, I want to take you all on a trip down memory lane for a moment. Do you remember when Foursquare first launched at South by Southwest? I think it was way back in 2009. And for those of you that don't remember, it was a huge location-based social network at the time, which let people check into locations to share with their friends and earn badges. I even remember being the mayor of the NEC here in the West Midlands for a while. But in 2014, Foursquare split its main app into two separate apps, the Foursquare City Guide and Swarm. And it was Swarm that let users check into those locations and earn mayorships and other stickers with a focus on social utility. But I think that was eventually de-emphasised in favour of lifelogging. But Foursquare City Guide, on the other hand, used past check-in data and data from Swarm to power up an almost Yelp competitor, giving users a way to find great restaurants and experiences in their location. So in short, here in 2020, Foursquare Labs is not the same company it was, and it has evolved over time. And today's guest is Max Sklar, and he's from Foursquare Labs and also hosts the local Maximum podcast. So Max is a software engineer and new product developer by trade with a focus on machine learning, content discovery and prototyping. Now, the bulk of his work as a machine learning engineer was at Foursquare, where he built Foursquare City Guide's critically acclaimed 10-point venue rating system and the MarsBot app. But more recently, he's led the development of a causality model for Foursquare's ad attribution product and now works at Foursquare's innovation lab. So we've got so much to talk about today and a lot of ground to cover. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to Brooklyn so we can speak with Max now. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Max. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Hi, Neil. Thanks for having me on the show. I spent the bulk of my professional career as a machine learning engineer at Foursquare. So for most of the last decade, I was heads down in implementing machine learning algorithms on location data, on marketing data, and all that fun stuff, and really got to dive deep into that. Currently, I am working at Foursquare after a short stint away from Foursquare. That didn't last very long, but I'm back and I'm doing some prototyping on consumer applications, which is we'll get into a little later. But it's sort of getting back to Foursquare's roots, which is consumer applications, building things that people enjoy using, that sort of thing. And also, I have a weekly podcast called The Local Maximum, where I talk about issues in the tech industry in general and sort of bring it back to my machine learning expertise from time to time.
Excellent. And your moment coming back to Foursquare there feels almost reminiscent of Al Pacino in Godfather 3, where he says, just when I think I'm out, they pull me back in. That's
pretty accurate, actually. It was, the company's changed so much over the last 10 years. It was kind of like the darling startup of the New York City tech scene back in 2010, 2011. That's when I joined. There were a lot of people who said it wasn't going to last, but we had a lot of smart people who just kind of kept going at it. And so it pivoted into an enterprise company. I enjoyed that for a bit. I had 1 year where it was like, I don't know where this is going. And so I decided to try something else. But then it was like, every week someone there was asking me for a favor, It was like, and my new office was close to my old office. So they were always like, oh, can you come over and help with a meetup? Can you come over and help us? We're trying to do an internal podcast. And I was like, okay. It's just like, at some point, I'm just like, okay, let me come back here.
As a guy that was the go-to guy in IT a few years ago, I completely get that blessing and curse. But at Foursquare, though, you did build Foursquare's City Guide's critically acclaimed 10-point venue rating system, and also the Marsbot app, I believe. But can you tell me a bit more about your time at Foursquare?
Yeah, so that is there are a lot of things we built over, like I like to say when there's always like a yearly look back, it's like there's a lot of things we build in a year. Well, there's a lot of things we built in a year. There's a whole lot of things we build in 10 years. And so it's almost incredible to look back. But one of the early ones is really one of my favorite, which is the 10-point rating system. And that's, if you use Foursquare City Guide app, each venue has a rating. Now, you might have also seen ratings on things like, Google Maps or Yelp or Amazon, not for places, for books, because Foursquare is mostly locations like restaurants and bars and things like that. And so, first of all, I was pretty new at the company at the time. So in 2011, especially in 2012. So it felt like a lot of responsibility, especially since the app was designed around finding places. And it was like, you're going to design the rating system for the app, which tells the world, the users, how good a place is or how good we think a place is. And not only was it a challenging problem, but it was also a problem that, like, I wanted to take a lot of care in making sure that it looked good and it was fair to businesses and things like that. And the takeaway was, what was really fascinating was we tried all sorts of things to get the ratings to look good, because we wanted to build some algorithm to build some ratings. And a lot of what we were trying initially didn't work very well. We were trying to base it around, okay, we know how many people are going to these places, so is that related to the rating? Well, it turns out that some places that people go to a lot are not really very nice places, whether it's like Penn Station here or whether it's, the post office or things like that. So then we also tried things like, okay, if someone likes or dislikes it, maybe that will work, but it seems like liking something is a little too cheap of a thing to do. So things get too many likes. And the data that I ended up diving into was the tip data, which in Foursquare, you could leave 2 or 3 sentences of information at a place. It's supposed to be kind of like either a short form review, or I think the original vision for it was like a tip, like here's what you do when you go there. Yeah. And so what I looked at on that was sentiment analysis on the tips and trying to determine what is a positive tip and what is a negative tip. And that didn't quite solve it, because we kind of spun our gears for a year or so. I mean, we weren't working exclusively on that, but it was like, a lot of the sentiment analysis tools that were available at the time weren't really working well on those 2-sentence statements that people made. There's a lot of slang, a lot of just sentence fragments and things like that. And so what ended up happening is, once Foursquare implemented likes and dislikes, we ended up looking at, okay, here is the set of tips that people wrote, but also left an explicit like or explicit dislike on the place. And I was like, aha, there is my training data. And when we trained a machine learning algorithm on that, it did a very good job at determining which tips were likes and which were mixed reviews and which were negative reviews. Aggregated that, and we actually got the kernel of a pretty good system for doing ratings. And we also have it works for every language, which is really cool. And like one of the things that I love about this is the thing gets retrained every week. I think it's been retrained every week for the last 7 years or something like that. And basically, as more people use Foursquare, as more people add content to Foursquare, the thing gets better every week. And also, like, it learns new languages that it wouldn't have known 7 years ago, because people added content in those languages just without any human intervention, which is kind of rare for a machine learning software project to actually get better over several years. I'm surprised at how well it's held up over the last, because no one's touched it in 4 or 5 years. So I'm surprised it's still held up reasonably well as compared to other rating systems. But people like it because I think, we really designed it to be like, okay, what is the rating system that I want to use when I'm exploring New York or something like that? Does this work for me? And we really thought in terms of those parameters. We weren't thinking about, we weren't thinking about money at the time, which really helped the which really helped the product and made people kind of fall in love with that aspect of the product.
So I'm curious, what have been the biggest lessons that you've learned from your time at Foursquare?
Okay, well, there's a lot of lessons over the years. One is, I think when I started, I started that, I had other software engineering jobs before, and then I was coming right out of grad school when I joined Foursquare, and I had a lot less confidence then in my ability to get things done. I feel like one of the things I learned is that a lot of the things that you think you can get done in software are actually possible if you kind of take a deep breath and maybe sometimes step back and come back to it. But a lot of time is spent banging your head against the wall. It's so important to get it into your head. No, it's possible to build this thing. And if you just believe it's possible to build it, I know it sounds crazy, but it's if something kind of works in your head in theory, then oftentimes the problem is either spending too much time on it and not taking time away or not taking a deep breath. But I found that when engineers kind of have the space to learn and to iterate and are not like constantly being pressured to get the next thing done at a certain time, they can accomplish way more amazing and unique things than they otherwise can. So that's sort of like my personal preference in terms of how I like to work. I think that when you're picking a project, one thing that you really want to have is you want to have business alignment. I've seen a lot of situations with products where either the company is on board, or maybe the company says they're on board, but you kind of look at it and you're like, okay, well, this doesn't really help the company. And so sometimes you actually do have to get involved and see, okay, this project is going to have the space to succeed in the long term, because there are a lot of projects that don't succeed. I also think that, it's very important to have good leadership in there that understands engineering. There are a lot of mediocre managers. There are a lot of kind of executives that don't really understand what's going on. I think that's one thing that Foursquare has, is there have been some people in leadership who were very, who kind of gave engineers the space to work and to get motivated. And that helped us a lot.
Fantastic. And I'm so glad to get you on here today, because I want to leverage some of your experience, because there does seem to be so much confusion around machine learning at the moment. So for everyone listening that might be outside of the industry, maybe they're a business leader or a decision maker, can you define exactly what it is in a language that everyone can understand?
Okay, so I'm going to give this a shot. I'm going to compare like what's a machine learning algorithm to what's a non-machine learning algorithm. Yeah. I think a non-machine learning algorithm is kind of just a set of instructions to come up with an answer. So if you think about it in terms of schooling, in terms of adding two numbers, you do this, you add the ones digit, and then you carry the one, and then you add the tens digit and all that stuff. So that's an algorithm. An algorithm that you might have in kind of a web application or something like that is, load the page. If you're logged in, load this. If you're not logged in, load the login page. If you have a notification, put a little red dot somewhere. If you don't have a notification, don't do that. That sort of thing. Yeah. So it's very deterministic. A regular algorithm. A machine learning algorithm is just what it sounds like. The machine learns. And so what does that mean? It means that somehow the algorithm is going to get better and better as the machine sees more data. So let me give you an example. Well, a good example was what we just talked about, which was Foursquare tips. I want to try to classify Foursquare tips as being a positive review or a negative review. Now, if I want to do that by hand, which would be absurd to put it slightly, I could be like, okay, if someone said delicious food, I can scan for delicious. I could scan for the word delicious in the tip, and then I can give it some points for being a positive tip. If someone said bad service, I could scan for that and give it some negative points, and all sorts of rules that would never work in the real world, because there's always natural language has way too many rules for one person or even a group of people to understand and properly maintain. One of the actually interesting tidbits I had on that was one of the first attempts at doing sentiment analysis on the Foursquare tips. We used a word list with scores. We used exactly that. It was like, it was learned, but it was a static word list that I think was learned from Twitter. And wicked was a negative word. So the worst place in the world, according to this system, was the Gershwin Theater in Midtown Manhattan, because they were playing the play, the show Wicked. Yeah. So it didn't work. And so the idea is, okay, as we get information in on here's a positive example, here's a negative example, we're actually going to build something that is going to adjust the scores to, essentially we say it's learning, it's getting better at classifying new data by sort of getting better at, by looking at information that we feed it in and actually getting better over time. And when you kind of break down this problem, you sort of think, okay, I want to build something that's going to get better over time as I give it new information. How do I do that? When you actually sit down to solve, okay, what's the right way to solve this problem? That's when you get into a lot of statistics. That's when you get into a lot of the computational methods and that sort of thing. But all of that stuff is trying to solve that problem of how do you build an algorithm that actually gets better as it sees more stuff and it's not just designed one and done.
And there does seem to be more and more solutions out there that claim to be machine learning, but are not actually machine learning. And I do like to try and bust a few myths on this podcast. So is there anything that particularly grates you out there, or any myths that you want to finally lay to rest about those solutions that don't actually have machine learning?
Well, it's I've seen this a lot. There's a lot of different gradations of machine learning, and so sometimes there's a argument over, is logistic regression machine learning, or a very simple statistical algorithm machine learning? And actually, I think it is, because to me, like, so long as you're feeding something in and it's getting better over time, then it's machine learning. Now, there are things that are, I think a bigger problem is kind of classifying something as like, deep learning or strong AI or something like that, when it really isn't. So deep learning is a subset of machine learning that was kind of all the rage over the last 5 years. Very good at doing things like image recognition and stuff like that. But, many people try to, pass off their system as some very sophisticated multi-level machine learning model or neural network or deep learning, when the problem doesn't need that, B, that's not what they're doing. You could, as I like to say, okay, let's take our logistic regression and add a couple sigmoid functions here and there. It's okay if you don't know what those are, but like add a couple simple doodads here and there, and now we say we have a neural network, right? Because a neural network is just a little more complicated than a logistic regression. But I feel like sometimes people also classify the more deterministic algorithms, whether it's decision tree. Well, decision trees could be machine learning so long as you're learning the tree. But if it's a decision tree that's hand coded, sometimes that's classified as machine learning when it's really not. It's just it's sort of like an expert-based system, which is this whole idea of expert-based system to machine learning has been around for decades. It's kind of the expert-based system can only go too far, which is just like it sounds, a bunch of experts saying, do this when this happens and do that when that happens.
And another reason I was excited to get you on the podcast today, especially in the current climate, is you've got a passion for teaching ways to build a future that is decentralized, pro-human, and pro-freedom. And that is so refreshing, especially right now. I think it really resonates with a lot of people. But can you tell me a little bit about that and your passion for that?
Yeah. I have this problem where if I don't like the product that I'm working on, if I feel like we're not building for quality, or I feel like there's something that there's just something wrong. I like to think, okay, it's work. I should be able to do the work, but then I just end up falling apart. I end up not being able to focus on it. But let's take that one at a time. So the pro-human part of it, that sort of goes back to, way back when I was working here in Brooklyn at a company called Wireless Generation. It was an education technology company. That was my first job out of undergrad. And, they were building software for teachers. And so they had to hire a bunch of designers. And I got to work with some of the designers there, which was really interesting. And it was really the discussions that we had were like, okay, yes, you can design it this way, and this is all the features are implemented here, but are teachers actually going to use this? Are teachers ever going to find, this drop-down menu? Are teachers ever going to find this button on, well, at the time it was like the Palm Pilot, which is crazy. But, and that's something that Foursquare has a lot of too. It has a lot of designers. And so I just feel like there's a lot of software, where, teams try to get it out as soon as possible, just get it out there, and quality doesn't matter. And then someone on the other end who has to use this system gets really frustrated, and people never see that. And so I don't want to do that. I like to build things that, hey, this is something that I could use. And not just that, because sometimes I'm not the main person using it. Like, I want something that's like easy to use for the person who's actually going to use it. And so that's why you have to do a lot of testing and that sort of thing. And also another part of ProHuman, which is even more important these days, I think, is that to ask the question, like, is this software actually looking out for the interests of the user? Is this something that, is this something that if I had in my pocket on my phone, for example, that were the designers thinking, okay, this is going to make this person's life easier? Or is it something where we're going to trick this person into getting this thing on their phone, and then we're going to ping them ads all the time, and then we're going to make a few bucks off them? And I just don't, it feels unethical, but I just don't like the idea of building that sort of thing. I mean, I had an episode on this way back in episode 12. It's one of my less listened to episodes, but it's with a product manager at Foursquare about kind of the difference between, like, the good and evil software that's being built. And so, if we're going to build like smart agents for people, if you're going to build like an AI in your pocket, who's the AI working for? Well, I want the AI working for me if it's in my pocket. I don't want it to be working for someone. I mean, look, there's always kind of data collection, and there's always a business model and that sort of thing. But you want to build it so that you're actually like someone has to represent the user.
And is there anything else that you can share with us today that will just help anybody listening that might be able to, for the first time, maybe grasp at some new concepts from machine learning that they can then apply in their everyday life? Is there anything that springs to mind there?
Oh, yeah. There's a ton. So I like to do this on my show, where sometimes I get into the nitty-gritty details of machine learning for people who are more like mathematically inclined. But sometimes I just take an idea that we use in the machine learning field and say, okay, well, we're teaching machines how to learn. This works for machines. Is there something analogous that can work for humans as well, that could help us think about the world better? And it turns out there are. So one of the concepts that we have in machine learning is the idea of underfitting versus overfitting. So if you're overfitting, and I did an episode on this, if you're overfitting, that means you're essentially, you're drawing too many conclusions from the data. So we were often talking about how, sometimes little kids will overfit. They'll assume that they have a few examples in their life of this person is older than that person, and therefore, or person A is older than person B, therefore person A is taller than person B. So they'll come to the conclusion that older always means taller, right? And even though that's not always true, that's called overfitting. And underfitting is the opposite. Underfitting is when you kind of refuse to draw any conclusions based on data. You're kind of stuck in your ways, and you won't like update based on new information can come in. And so there's sort of opposite problems. There's sort of an opposite ends of the spectrum. And so it is kind of helpful to think in your life, like, are there areas where I'm overfitting? Are there areas where I'm underfitting? And how can I how can I kind of adjust my beliefs better? And speaking of adjusting your beliefs, another important aspect that I like to teach a lot about is called Bayesian inference, which is just boils down to the idea that you have a model, maybe a mental model of how the world works, and then you update that model when new information comes in. And it might sound obvious, but when you kind of formalize that and just say, okay, here's new information. What does this tell me about how the world works that I didn't that I wasn't sure about before? Then I think people end up thinking a lot more clearly.
Well, there's so much I could talk with you about today and demystify so much of this technology. But can you tell listeners a little bit more about rapid prototyping too, and building products for people listening that are just completely unfamiliar with that phrase?
Well, yeah. So I need to get back to MarsBot. Now, it's not as rapid as. So a lot of people might be familiar with something called a hackathon, where a bunch of people get together and build a software or a prototype very quickly. What I kind of fell into is the Foursquare Labs team, and what we did. Well, there's a product called MarsBot that I built with the founder back in 2015, 2016. So his name is Dennis Crowley. He's been on my show a few times. He was the founder and CEO of Foursquare for many years, and now he is, he handed it off to other people, and he's running the Foursquare Labs team. So back in 2015, he wanted to build an agent in your pocket that you text back and forth with that will tell you where all the great restaurants are and what's opening up and where you're walking and that sort of thing. And it wasn't a very organized project. There wasn't going to be a whole lot of engineers on it. It was kind of outside the engineering management structure, and there wasn't a whole lot of process. And to me, I was like, this is amazing. But I was very surprised that a lot of engineers didn't immediately sign up and jump at the opportunity to do that. So maybe I'm unique in kind of enjoying that way of working. And so we worked on that for a year. It was us, a few other people, including Marissa Chaco, who's the product manager I interviewed in that episode I told you about good and bad software. And it was like, okay, let's try to build this thing that's based on text messaging. And what we got was something pretty cool. Like, I can walk into a cafe and then it immediately texts me, this is the best thing to order, because Foursquare has all that information. What was nice about that was, we didn't have to worry about ads. We didn't have to worry about, business needs. It was just, I want to build something that helps the user. Now, maybe that's a little bit of of kind of a dreamland when it comes to most software projects. But hey, if I can get into the dreamland, that's great. And that's really the reason why I came back to Foursquare, because Dennis said, now we're actually going to have a formal labs team, and we're going to be able to do this stuff full time. So we're working on a project now called MarsBot Audio, where essentially you're walking around the city with your headphones, and when you have this thing on, it's going to point out interesting things nearby to you and tell you about what's going on in them. And also you can record audio and hear other people's audio, which is kind of scary. Like, what are people going to leave? I kind of want to see what what happens there. And so we had been working on this for the last 6 months, and we were very excited to launch it. And the launch date was supposed to be March 11th. And the question was, are we going to be ready? Are we not going to be ready? Are we going to? And it turned out March 10th, we were ready. And then we were like, okay, we're going to put this out. And the country shut down. So that didn't quite work out. But we're kind of working on getting some coronavirus data sets together from Foursquare data. So we kind of shifted a little bit, and we'll return to that in 6 months, hopefully, or whenever we feel like things are opening back up and people want to get outside and explore and things like that. But what's really exciting, I'm just excited about the idea that people are going to get excited about using consumer apps again. And one of the things I'm excited about, like I said before, is just how much trouble are our users going to get into? People think it's a huge problem. People are going to leave spam. People are going to leave all these horrible voice messages that you're going to get when you're walking down the street. I'm like, okay, let's see what they do, and then we'll fix it. But it's when you have 100 users, 1,000 users, you could do that.
And at the very beginning of the podcast, you did mention you've got your own show as well. So can you tell me a bit more about your podcast, what kind of topics you cover, and the kind of people you interview on there too?
Yeah, so I started the Local Maximum about 2 years ago for a variety of reasons, but I basically started it started when I was like, okay, there's so many people here at the place I work that are working on cool stuff, and so many people I know who are working on cool stuff. So maybe I could just interview them. And so that's what I started doing. But then I just enjoyed the whole podcasting format. I enjoyed the idea of the podiverse, which is, hey, there are all these podcasts out there. People are interviewing each other. They're talking to each other. They're exchanging ideas. And not only that, but it's a way better format to exchange ideas than currently on social media. Because in social media, people are shouting at each other, spiking the football, all that stuff. Whereas in podcasts, kind of people sit down, work things out, have really interesting discussions, and then it spreads because everyone talks to the people they're interested in, and then those people in turn talk to the people they're interested in, and kind of ideas spread from podcast to podcast. So I really liked just being involved with that and talking about the weekly news, what's going on in tech, what's going on in the industry, what's going on in the news in general, and trying to, there are a lot of people who do that with podcasting. So I kind of think, okay, what's my angle? And it's like, well, I know a lot about machine learning. I know about probability. So let's take the news and let's kind of use machine learning and probability theory and whatever I know from engineering to try to explain what's going on. And so to that end, sometimes I do solo shows where I do a deep dive into issues that can range anywhere from, abstract mathematics to a couple of weeks ago, I talked about the epidemiology models for coronavirus. I do co-hosted shows, which are often news focused with my co-host, Aaron. And then I interview sometimes engineers, sometimes authors, sometimes other tech podcasters, and and also I've gone out a little bit. Sometimes historians, economists, people like that, just people who I find interesting. And then a lot of times what I try to do is these are people who have been on other podcasts, but I try to kind of talk to them about what they've talked about before, but sort of introduce an idea that I had been exploring in a previous on my show. So to kind of expand what they're talking about a little bit. So that's sort of been my approach so far. I wish I could give like a 2-sentence elevator pitch. They say you should have that for a podcast, but I think if I'm going to spend all my time working on a podcast, I should just do what I find interesting.
Love it. And for anyone that wants to find that podcast or contact you or find out more information about Foursquare, you just point everyone in the right direction of how they can do that.
Right. So the Local Maximum is the name of the podcast. The Local Maximum, by the way, is another concept from machine learning or optimization that one can use in their life. But that's a whole other topic. So localmaxradio.com if you want to go to the website, but if you just have a podcatcher or a podcast app, just type in the Local Maximum, you should be able to find it. Localmaxradio@gmail.com to reach out to me, or I'm so easy to find on the internet. I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn, whatever. It all works for me.
Love it. Well, I've loved chatting with you today. I'd love to keep in touch with you and find out where this journey is going to take you. But more than anything, just a big thank you for taking the time to come on this podcast and chat with me today. Thanks again, Max.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Man, we covered a lot of ground there, didn't we? Machine learning, rapid prototyping, podcasting, emerging technology, state of the tech industry, Silicon Valley, Foursquare, and much more. I loved how we were able to unpack machine learning a little bit more, and hopefully it makes a little bit more sense to people that are new to the industry. As always, though, I always invite you all to throw your virtual hat into the ring and contact me. Let me know your thoughts on anything we've talked about recently, or even if you've got a question to ask me. I have an open door policy over here at Tech Talks Daily, so feel free to email me directly, techblogwriter@outlook.com. There's no virtual assistants managing my email. You will get straight through to me. Same with Twitter and LinkedIn. Twitter, LinkedIn, @Neil C. Hughes. And my website is techblogwriter@outlook.com. So if you want to work with me or even find out a little bit more information about my new book, Great TED Talks, Innovation, an unofficial guide and words of wisdom for 100 TED speakers on the subject of innovation. Whatever it is, if you need my help with anything or you just want a friendly chat, you know where to find me. And on that note, because I'm throwing so many podcasts at you at the moment, I don't want to outstay my welcome. Nobody wants to be that guy that hangs around just a little bit too long after the party. So I'll make my excuses and leave out the front door now. But I'll return again tomorrow. So thanks for listening as always. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.